prophecy chamber is prepared for annual foresight ceremony. Ancient Thessari tradition, where royal seer Oracle Cathara conducts divination rituals determining major decisions about empire's future direction. The ceremony isn't casual tradition. Thessari governance treats prophecy as legitimate guidance that shapes strategic planning. Oracle Cathara's predictions over 15 years have proven remarkably accurate about military threats, political upheavals, economic disruptions. The empire has learned to take her visions seriously rather than dismissing them as mystical performance. Today's ceremony addresses succession questions. Queen Seraphina has ruled for 20 years, but succession planning requires understanding what threats and opportunities the next generation will face. Oracle Cathara will divine what the empire's future holds, providing guidance that informs how Seraphina prepares her eventual successor. The throne room is filled with assembled witnesses, senior nobles, military commanders, governmental officials who need to understand prophetic guidance that will shape their strategic decisions. Alliance representatives are also present. The ceremony isn't secret, and cooperation between Thessari Empire and Human Alliance requires that both governments understand the prophetic framework informing Thessari decision-making. Engineer David Chen attends as Junior Alliance representative. He's human technician assigned to Embassy Engineering Corps, maintaining advanced systems supporting Alliance operations in Thessari capital. His presence at the ceremony is bureaucratic courtesy rather than meaningful participation. Alliance protocol requires engineering personnel to occasionally attend governmental proceedings to demonstrate cooperation breadth beyond just diplomatic and military channels. He stands at the throne room's periphery among other junior Alliance personnel, observing ancient ritual that he finds fascinating despite his skepticism about prophecy's validity. The incense smoke creating atmosphere in the chamber. The chanting that Oracle Cathara performs to enter trance state. The elaborate ceremonial framework surrounding what David suspects is sophisticated cold reading rather than genuine divination. But he respects that Thessari culture treats prophecy seriously, and he's genuinely interested in understanding how ancient traditions interface with modern governmental decision-making, even while privately doubting the supernatural claims. Oracle Cathara never hesitates during these ceremonies. She's performed them for 15 years, stood before generals delivering prophecies about military campaigns without flinching, provided visions that shaped succession decisions and trade policies without showing uncertainty, faced the weight of entire empire's future depending on her guidance without visible anxiety. She stands before the assembled court with practiced confidence, begins the ceremonial chanting that prepares her for prophetic vision, maintains controlled bearing that communicates absolute certainty about her capacity to divine empire's future. The ritual proceeds through established stages. Incense smoke intensifying, chanting reaching rhythmic peak. Oracle Cathara's chromatic patterns shifting to colors that Thessari tradition associates with trance state receptive to prophetic insight. Then she turns her gaze across the assembly. Standard protocol, the oracle surveys witnesses present, acknowledging that the prophecy she'll deliver serves collective understanding rather than just sovereign's private knowledge. Her eyes sweep across senior nobles, across military commanders, across governmental officials, the professional sweep of experienced seer cataloging who's present to receive prophetic guidance. Then her eyes meet David's, and everything changes. Her breath catches, visible gasp that breaks the ceremonial rhythm. Her hands shake, controlled bearing collapsing into obvious physical distress. The chromatic patterns that moments ago showed practiced trance state now flash colors David recognizes as profound shock mixed with fear. The chamber falls into uneasy silence. The assembled witnesses processing that Oracle Cathara, who never hesitates, who delivers prophecies shaping wars and dynasties without trembling, just reacted with visible alarm to seeing Junior Alliance engineer standing at the ceremony's periphery. Oracle Cathara stands frozen for extended moment, staring at David with expression mixing terror and confusion, as if his presence revealed something she didn't expect to see, something that fundamentally disrupts whatever prophetic framework she was prepared to deliver. Slowly, with visible effort to regain composure, she turns away from David toward Queen Seraphina, seated on throne, observing the ceremony. The oracle approaches the throne platform, not with the confident bearing that usually characterizes prophecy delivery. With hesitant steps, suggesting she's about to communicate something she wishes she didn't have to reveal. She leans close to Queen Seraphina, speaks words meant to be private despite hundreds of witnesses present. But the ceremonial chamber's acoustics, designed to carry prophetic pronouncements clearly to all assembled, mean that her whispered words reach everyone present despite her attempt at discretion. Your fate is tied to his. 4 words, delivered with trembling certainty despite their whispered delivery. 4 words that every person in the chamber hears clearly despite the oracle's intention to communicate privately. Oracle Kethara points subtly toward David's position at the chamber's periphery, making clear that his refers to the human engineer whose presence somehow triggered prophetic reaction that disrupted the entire ceremony. The reaction among assembled witnesses is immediate. Advisors stiffen with visible alarm. Guards shift position reflexively. Senior nobles exchange urgent glances trying to interpret what binding prophecy about sovereign's fate connected to unknown junior alliance personnel means for Empire's future. Because in Thessari culture, prophecy is not suggestion. Oracle Kethara's visions aren't recommendations about what might happen if certain conditions are met. They're inevitabilities, descriptions of what will happen regardless of attempts to prevent or avoid the foreseen outcomes. 15 years of accurate predictions have established that her prophecies describe actual future rather than just possible trajectories. Your fate is tied to his isn't warning about potential connection that might develop. It's statement of inevitable binding between Queen Seraphina and David Chen that will shape both their futures regardless of whether they choose to accept or resist that connection. And the oracle's trembling delivery, her obvious fear and distress about what she saw, suggests that the bound fate isn't simple political alliance or comfortable cooperation. It's something profound and probably difficult that neither party can escape once the prophecy has been spoken. David stands frozen at the periphery, processing that he just became central figure in Thessari royal prophecy, despite being completely unprepared for and uninterested in any role connecting his fate to alien sovereign's future. Queen Seraphina's expression shows controlled reaction, not panic, but clear recognition that Oracle Kethara just revealed something significant that requires immediate attention despite the ceremony being designed to address succession planning rather than unexpected prophetic connections to junior alliance personnel. Explain, Seraphina commands quietly. What does fate tied to his mean? What did you see? Oracle Kethara struggles to maintain composure while responding. I saw convergence, Your Majesty. 2 paths that were separate becoming inevitably intertwined. Your future and his future, they merge in ways that reshape both destinies. I cannot see the specifics of how the binding occurs or what it produces, but I see with absolute certainty that your fate and his fate are no longer separate trajectories. They're bound together in ways that neither of you can prevent or escape. Why did you tremble when you saw him? Lord Vethros asks sharply. Why did seeing this human engineer create visible distress if the binding is simply political alliance or cooperative relationship? Because the binding I saw carries enormous weight, Oracle Kethara responds, her voice still shaking. Because convergence between sovereign and unknown individual that creates futures I couldn't fully perceive but that felt overwhelming in their significance. Because I have never seen binding this profound attached to someone who wasn't already integrated into Empire's power structures. The disparity between his current irrelevance and his prophesied centrality, that disparity is what caused my reaction. She looks directly at David. You weren't meant to be part of this ceremony. You're peripheral observer with no role in succession planning. But the moment I looked at you, I saw that you're not peripheral to Her Majesty's future. You're central to it in ways I cannot fully explain, but that I know with prophetic certainty are inevitable. David finds his voice despite the shock. I'm maintenance engineer. I have no connection to Queen Seraphina beyond being assigned to Alliance Embassy in her capital. I'm not central to anything except keeping environmental systems operational. Whatever you think you saw, It's misinterpretation or mistake, rather than genuine prophecy about my fate being bound to sovereign's future. Prophecy is not misinterpretation, Oracle Kethara states firmly despite her continued distress. What I see is what will occur. Your belief about your own irrelevance doesn't change the reality that your fate and Her Majesty's fate are bound together. The binding exists regardless of whether you understand or accept it. This is insane, David responds. You looked at me during ceremonial trance and had vision connecting me to Queen. That's either genuine prophecy, which I don't believe in, or its psychological reaction creating false connections. Either way, it doesn't actually bind my fate to sovereign's future, unless we choose to treat random vision as inevitable reality. In Thessari culture, prophecy describes inevitable reality, whether individuals choose to accept it or not. Lord Vethros explains with barely controlled concern. Oracle Kethara's predictions over 15 years have proven accurate even when people attempted to prevent or avoid foreseen outcomes. Her prophecies aren't suggestions, they're descriptions of what will happen. If she says your fate is tied to Her Majesty's, that binding will occur regardless of your skepticism or attempts to maintain separate paths. That's treating prophecy as self-fulfilling prediction, David argues. If everyone believes Oracle's visions are inevitable, they'll act in ways that make those visions come true. The accuracy isn't prophetic, it's behavioral response to believing prophecies are inevitable. Explain the accuracy about military threats that were prevented through advance warning, Queen Seraphina challenges. Oracle Kethara predicted attacks that we successfully defended against. Those prophecies were accurate despite our actions, preventing the worst outcomes. That's not self-fulfilling behavior, that's genuine foresight about threats that existed independent of belief in prophecy. I don't have explanation for prophecy's accuracy, David admits. But I also don't have reason to believe my fate is actually bound to yours just because Oracle had vision during ceremonial trance. Whatever she saw, it's not inevitable binding unless we choose to act as if it is. The binding exists whether you act on it or not, Oracle Kethara insists. Your paths will converge because convergence is already written in futures I can perceive. Your choices matter in how you respond to the binding, but they don't prevent the binding itself. Commander Marcus Webb, Senior Human Alliance Officer present at the ceremony, approaches urgently. Engineer Chen, I need you to accompany me immediately. We need to report this development to Alliance Diplomatic Corps and determine appropriate response to Thessari royal prophecy, naming one of our personnel as fate-bound to their sovereign. There's no development to report, David protests. Oracle had vision. I don't believe visions create actual fate bindings. We report that ceremonial incident occurred, but that it doesn't create real obligations or connections. You're underestimating how seriously Thessari culture treats prophecy, Webb responds. If Oracle Kethara declares your fate bound to Queen Seraphina's, that declaration creates expectations and obligations regardless of whether you believe in prophetic authority. We need diplomatic guidance about how to navigate situation where Thessari government will treat the binding as inevitable reality, even while we maintain skepticism about prophecy's validity. Queen Seraphina speaks with formal authority. Engineer Chen, the prophecy creates obligation that Thessari governance must address. I'm requiring you to remain in capital under palace supervision while we determine what Oracle Kethara's vision means for Empire's strategic planning. You're not prisoner, but you're also not free to simply depart and ignore prophetic declaration that your fate is bound to mine. You're detaining me based on prophecy, David asks with controlled anger. Restricting my movement because Oracle had vision during ceremonial trance. That's treating mystical performance as legitimate basis for governmental action. It's treating proven prophetic guidance as requiring careful response, Seraphina corrects. Oracle Kethara's visions have shaped Empire's major decisions for 15 years. Her declaration that our fates are bound, that requires investigation and understanding rather than dismissal just because you're skeptical about prophecy's legitimacy. What investigation? David challenges. What are you planning to do? Study me to determine what the binding means? Analyze my background looking for explanation about why Oracle connected us. That's treating me as subject for mystical investigation rather than as person with autonomy, who should be free to reject prophecy that I never asked for. The investigation is determining what Future's oracle perceived when she saw the binding, Serafina explains. Understanding what convergence between our fates means for Empire's strategic direction and for succession planning that this ceremony was meant to address. You're central to understanding I need, which is why palace supervision is necessary despite your objection. I refuse supervision, David states firmly. I'm Alliance personnel. You don't have authority to detain me just because Oracle had vision. I'm returning to embassy and requesting formal Alliance response to Thessari attempt to restrict my movement based on mystical claims. If you return to embassy, I'll request formal Alliance cooperation with prophetic investigation, Serafina responds calmly. Alliance protocols include provisions about cooperating with host governments' legitimate security and strategic needs. Prophecy declaring fate binding between sovereign and alliance personnel. That creates legitimate strategic concern requiring cooperation rather than resistance based on skepticism about prophetic validity. David realizes he's trapped. If he refuses cooperation, Serafina will escalate diplomatically in ways that force Alliance to choose between supporting his skepticism and maintaining cooperation with host government that treats prophecy as legitimate strategic guidance. What specifically do you want from me? David asks, trying to establish boundaries around whatever investigation Serafina is planning. I want understanding of what Oracle saw when she looked at you, Serafina responds. Why your presence triggered such profound reaction. What about you creates binding that Oracle describes as tying our fates together? Understanding requires your cooperation, participating in discussions, providing background information, allowing Oracle to explore what the prophetic vision revealed about convergence between our paths. You want me to participate in mystical investigation, treating me as prophetic subject, David summarizes. Cooperating with Oracle's divination about what the binding means and how it will manifest. That's asking me to validate prophetic framework I don't believe in by actively participating in investigation based on that framework. I'm asking you to cooperate with investigation that serves legitimate strategic interests regardless of whether you believe in prophetic validity, Serafina clarifies. Your skepticism is noted, but it doesn't eliminate obligation to cooperate when host government has legitimate reasons, based on their cultural framework, to investigate prophetic declaration affecting their sovereign's fate. David considers his limited options. He can refuse cooperation and create diplomatic incident. Or he can participate in investigation while maintaining his skepticism, treating it as cultural anthropology rather than as genuine prophetic exploration. I'll cooperate with investigation, he decides. Not because I believe in prophecy, but because diplomatic obligations require respecting host governments' cultural frameworks even when I'm skeptical about their validity. But I'm cooperating as skeptical subject, not as believer in prophetic binding. That distinction matters for how I engage with whatever mystical investigation you're planning. Your skepticism is acceptable, Serafina agrees. I don't require you to believe in prophecy. I require you to cooperate with investigation so we can understand what Oracle saw when she declared our fates bound together. Your skeptical participation is sufficient for that purpose. Over following days, David participates in investigation under palace supervision. Oracle Cathara conducts additional divination sessions, attempting to clarify what the initial prophetic vision revealed about fate binding between David and Queen Serafina. The sessions are uncomfortable for David, sitting in ceremonial chambers while Oracle performs rituals meant to explore prophetic connections, being treated as mystical subject rather than as engineer with technical expertise. Participating in framework he fundamentally doesn't believe in while trying to maintain respectful cooperation. Oracle Cathara's additional visions provide fragmented information rather than clear explanation. She sees convergence points, moments where David's path and Serafina's path intersect in ways that reshape both trajectories. She sees profound impact, changes to Empire's future direction that somehow depend on the binding between sovereign and engineer. But she doesn't see specifics about how the binding manifests or what actions create the convergence. The prophecy is frustratingly unclear, Lord Vethros complains during strategy session reviewing Oracle's findings. We know binding exists, we know it's significant, but we don't know what it means practically or how to prepare for convergence that Oracle describes but cannot detail. Prophecy often provides direction without specificity, Queen Seraphina responds. The value is knowing that binding exists and carries weight, even if we don't yet understand what form the binding will take. That knowledge allows us to remain open to convergence rather than dismissing unexpected developments that might represent prophetic fulfillment. But what does remain open to convergence mean practically? Commander Webb asks. Engineer Chen is Alliance personnel with technical duties. He's not positioned for role that would naturally intersect with Your Majesty's governmental responsibilities. How are we supposed to facilitate convergence that prophecy describes if we don't understand what circumstances would create the binding? We don't facilitate it, Seraphina responds. We accept that convergence will occur through circumstances we cannot predict or control. Attempting to force prophetic fulfillment often creates worse outcomes than allowing events to develop naturally. The investigation isn't about making binding happen. It's about understanding that binding exists so we're not blindsided when convergence occurs. David speaks, this is maddening approach to prophecy. You're treating Oracle's vague vision as requiring strategic preparation despite having no specific information about what you're preparing for. You're restricting my movement and investigating my background based on mystical claim that our fates are tied without understanding what that binding means practically. It's treating prophecy as requiring action while acknowledging prophecy doesn't provide actionable guidance. The action is awareness and openness, Seraphina clarifies. Knowing that binding exists means we pay attention when circumstances arise that might represent convergence. Without prophetic awareness, we might dismiss or resist developments that are actually prophetic fulfillment. The investigation creates readiness rather than specific preparation. But I'm still under palace supervision based on prophecy that doesn't specify why supervision is necessary, David points out. I'm being restricted without clear understanding of what threat or opportunity the restriction is meant to address. That's treating prophecy as justification for governmental action that wouldn't be justified without mystical framework. The supervision is precautionary measure while we understand prophetic implications, Seraphina responds. Once investigation provides sufficient clarity about binding's nature, supervision can be adjusted to reflect actual requirements rather than precautionary restriction. How long is sufficient clarity supposed to take? David asks. Days? Weeks? Indefinite supervision until Oracle has clearer vision about binding that may never clarify beyond vague declarations about fate convergence. As long as necessary to ensure prophetic obligations are properly understood, Seraphina states. I acknowledge the restriction is burdensome, but prophetic declaration about sovereign's fate, that creates responsibilities I cannot dismiss just because timeline is uncertain. After 2 weeks of investigation producing limited clarity, Oracle Kethara requests private session with David, just the two of them, without Queen Seraphina or other observers present. You don't believe in prophecy, Oracle observes during the private session. You think my visions are psychological phenomenon or sophisticated intuition rather than genuine foresight. That skepticism makes you hostile subject for divination exploration. I'm cooperating despite skepticism, David responds. I'm participating in your sessions. I'm answering questions. If that's insufficient, explain what cooperative non-skeptical participation would look like. Cooperative participation would include openness to possibility that binding I perceived is real rather than defending certainty that prophecy is invalid, Oracle explains. Your skepticism creates resistance that makes clarifying vision difficult. I need you to at least consider that binding exists so we can explore what it means rather than fighting against prophetic framework throughout investigation. I'll consider possibility, David agrees carefully. I still don't believe prophecy is valid, but I'll engage as if binding might exist rather than absolutely insisting it's impossible. Will that openness help clarify whatever you're trying to perceive? It should, Oracle confirms. The binding I saw when I looked at you, it was profound enough to make me tremble. That's not reaction I have to minor connections or strategic partnerships. Whatever ties your fate to Her Majesty's fate, it's significant in ways I haven't seen in other prophetic visions. Your openness to exploring what that significance might be, that will help me understand what the binding represents. Oracle Kethara performs another divination ritual, with David's more cooperative participation. Her chromatic patterns shift into trance state. Her focus narrows onto David with intensity, suggesting she's perceiving something specific rather than just experiencing vague mystical impression. Then she speaks with voice-mixing certainty and continued distress. The binding protects her. In future, I perceive, threats emerge that would destroy her without intervention that comes through you. Not military protection, something else. Something about your nature or your knowledge that becomes shield against threats she cannot defend against alone. Your fate bound to hers, that binding is what allows her to survive futures that would otherwise end her reign catastrophically. David processes this more specific prophetic claim. You're saying I'm destined to protect Queen from threats? That our bound fate is protective relationship, where I somehow defend sovereign I have no capacity to protect. I see protection, yes, Oracle confirms, but I still don't see specifics about what threats exist or how your intervention provides defense. Just certainty that binding between your fates creates survival pathway that wouldn't exist if your paths remained separate. That's what made me tremble, seeing sovereign's fate depending on convergence with unknown individual, who shouldn't be significant. 3 months after the initial prophecy, working relationship develops between David and Queen Seraphina, despite his continued skepticism and her pragmatic approach to prophetic obligations. David returns to his engineering duties, but maintains regular contact with Pallas. Weekly meetings with Seraphina discussing strategic matters, where his technical perspective might provide the protection that Oracle's prophecy described, though neither of them understands what form that protection will take. The arrangement is awkward. David treats it as cultural obligation rather than genuine prophetic necessity. Seraphina treats it as reasonable precaution based on Oracle's proven track record, even while acknowledging uncertainty about prophecy's meaning. During one of their regular meetings, Seraphina addresses the fundamental tension. You still don't believe prophecy is valid. You're maintaining contact because diplomatic obligations require cooperation, not because you accept that our fates are bound. That skepticism must be frustrating when prophecy declares you're essential to my survival. It's frustrating being bound to role I don't believe in, David confirms. But I've accepted that refusing cooperation creates more problems than participating skeptically. If Oracle's prophecy is valid, which I doubt, then maintaining availability serves legitimate purpose. If prophecy isn't valid, which I believe, then maintaining contact does no harm beyond being inconvenient obligation. Either way, cooperation is acceptable response even while maintaining skepticism. Have 3 months of regular contact changed your perspective about whether binding exists? Seraphina asks. Has working relationship we've developed created sense that perhaps Oracle perceived something real about connection between us? No, David responds honestly. I don't feel prophetically bound to your fate. I feel diplomatically obligated to maintain connection that serves Alliance Thessari cooperation. Any sense of connection comes from developing working relationship through regular contact, not from mystical fate binding that Oracle declared during ceremonial trance. So you attribute any developing connection to normal relationship building rather than to prophetic inevitability, Seraphina observes. That's internally consistent with your skepticism, even while being frustrating from perspective of someone who treats prophecy as legitimate guidance. Does my skepticism create problems for how you approach prophetic obligations? David asks. Does having prophetic protector who doesn't believe in prophecy undermine whatever strategic value the binding is supposed to provide? It creates tension, Seraphina admits. Oracle's prophecy declares you essential to my survival, but you don't accept that essentiality, which means you might not recognize prophetic fulfillment when circumstances arise requiring your intervention. That gap between prophetic declaration and your lack of belief, that could prevent binding from serving its protective purpose if you dismiss circumstances as unrelated to prophecy when they're actually prophetic necessity manifesting. But forced belief wouldn't serve better, David argues. If I pretended to accept prophecy while actually remaining skeptical, that false acceptance wouldn't make me more likely to recognize prophetic fulfillment. Honest skepticism with cooperative participation, that's more reliable than performed belief that doesn't reflect actual acceptance. Perhaps Serafina agrees, though I wonder whether genuine belief would create readiness that skepticism prevents. But forcing belief is impossible, so we work with honest skepticism and hope that if prophetic necessity arises, you'll respond appropriately despite not believing in prophetic framework. 6 months after initial prophecy, situation emerges that might represent prophetic fulfillment, or might just be coincidental crisis requiring David's technical expertise. Sabotage attempt targets palace environmental systems, creating potential catastrophic failure that would kill Queen Serafina and hundreds of palace personnel if not immediately addressed. David's engineering expertise allows him to identify sabotage method and implement emergency countermeasures that prevent the catastrophe. After crisis is resolved, Oracle Kethara declares, "This was prophetic fulfillment. The threat I perceived, Engineer Chen's intervention preventing catastrophic harm, that's what the binding protected against. His technical knowledge providing defense that Her Majesty couldn't access without his presence and expertise. Or it was coincidental crisis that I happened to be positioned to address, because diplomatic obligations keep me in regular contact with Palace," David counters. "My engineering expertise would have been relevant to environmental system sabotage regardless of whether Oracle had prophetic vision 6 months ago. This isn't prophecy fulfillment, this is technical expert responding to technical crisis. The prophecy created circumstances ensuring you were available when crisis emerged," Oracle argues. "Without prophetic binding requiring your continued palace contact, you might not have been present to identify and counter sabotage. The binding served its protective purpose by maintaining connection that positioned you to intervene when threat manifested. The binding, if it exists, didn't create my technical expertise," David responds. "That expertise comes from years of engineering training. Any protection I provided came from professional competence, not from mystical fate binding that Oracle perceived." "Both can be true," Serafina observes. "Your expertise is professional competence. The binding that ensured you were present to apply that expertise, that's prophetic framework positioning resources appropriately. Oracle's prophecy didn't create your ability to address crisis. It created circumstances, ensuring your ability was available when needed. That's treating prophecy as self-fulfilling," David maintains. "Oracle's declaration that our fates were bound created obligations, keeping me in palace contact. Those obligations positioned me to respond to crisis. But the positioning was result of behavioral response to prophecy, not result of prophetic foresight about necessary positioning." "Does the distinction matter?" Serafina asks. "Whether protection came from prophetic positioning or from coincidental availability, the outcome is same. Crisis was prevented. Oracle's prophecy about you providing essential protection proved accurate regardless of mechanism. The distinction matters for whether future prophetic declarations should be treated as inevitable guidance," David argues. "If this was genuine prophecy, Oracle's future visions deserve serious response. If this was self-fulfilling behavioral adaptation, Oracle's future visions are just predictions about how people will respond to believing prophecies rather than genuine foresight about inevitable outcomes. I treat Oracle's prophecies as legitimate guidance regardless of philosophical debates about mechanism," Serafina states. "Your intervention prevented catastrophe. Oracle predicted binding between us would serve protective purpose. That prediction proved accurate. Whether accuracy came from genuine foresight or self-fulfilling positioning, I'm treating it as validation of prophetic framework that guides empire's strategic decisions." 1 year after initial prophecy, David and Serafina reflect on how prophetic declaration shaped their relationship. "Oracle trembled when she looked at me," David recalls, "then whispered that our fates were tied. That moment, being named in prophecy I never asked for, That bound me to role I still don't fully understand or accept. The dangerous weight of being declared essential to sovereign's fate creates obligations I can never fully escape regardless of my skepticism. The prophecy transformed you from peripheral observer to central figure in Empire's strategic considerations, Serafina agrees. Your fate tied to mine through mystical declaration that neither of us controlled. That binding carries weight whether you believe in prophecy's validity or treat it as cultural framework requiring diplomatic respect. You're woven into my destiny regardless of your philosophical objections. Does prophecy create destiny or just describe behaviors that make predicted outcomes inevitable? David asks. After a year of living with prophetic binding, I still don't know whether Oracle saw genuine future or just created circumstances that made her predictions self-fulfilling. Perhaps that uncertainty is itself part of prophecy's nature, Serafina suggests. The inability to distinguish between genuine foresight and self-fulfilling response, that ambiguity